During the town's annual ball, the very one my husband helped create, I celebrated my 60th birthday with a smile on my face and a heavy heart full of longing. Suddenly, my stepdaughter took the stage and announced in front of everyone that I was no longer part of the family, claiming she had changed the will. Maybe you too have felt the deep pain of family betrayal. In shock, I went to my husband's old office, where I found the real will and a handwritten note from him. "What's yours no one can take away." I returned to the ball, faced my stepdaughter, and said firmly, "You tried to erase my existence with paper and ink, but the truth is written through actions and justice." In that moment, I danced, not for the party, but for the justice I had reclaimed. The town hall glowed with golden lights, just like it did every year. Soft jazz played while couples twirled, laughter echoing beneath the chandelier. I wore the blue dress my husband once said made me look like the sky before dawn. It hugged my waist a little tighter now, but I still felt beautiful. As I walked in, people greeted me with warmth, but every face reminded me of him, the man who built this tradition, who dreamed of a place where joy danced freely. And now, I stood alone in the house of his dreams, trying to feel like I still belonged. I sipped champagne, letting the bubbles tickle my tongue, hoping they'd lift the heaviness in my chest. Every corner of that hall whispered memories, his laugh during setup, his hand on my back as we opened the dance. A woman hugged me tightly and said, "He'd be so proud tonight." I nodded, afraid my voice would betray the ache inside. Grief doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just sits beside you, quietly holding your hand. That night, mine gripped tighter than usual. But still, I smiled, because he would have wanted me to. In the far corner, my stepdaughter stood with a group of friends, her eyes darting toward me now and then. There was something cold in her gaze. Not anger, something sharper. Calculation, maybe. We hadn't spoken much since the funeral. She handled the estate, the papers, the practical things. I stayed with the emotions, the photographs, the scent of him in the pillows. She always said I was too sentimental, but I didn't mind. Love lives in sentiment, and I had loved him deeply. The dance floor filled, and someone called out my name. "Birthday girl!" A cheer erupted. I raised my glass, heart swelling with the mix of joy and sadness only turning 60 could bring. There was music, clapping, a circle of friends around me. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the rhythm carry me. For a brief moment, I felt light again, like I was floating in a memory made real. Then the music stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Abruptly. A murmur rippled through the crowd, followed by silence thick enough to hold your breath. I opened my eyes and saw her walking to the stage. Her heels clicked against the wooden floor like punctuation marks. Each step said, "Something's coming." And when she grabbed the microphone, my entire body braced itself for what I didn't yet know. And I had no idea her words would shatter the night my heart was trying so hard to hold together. She stood tall on the stage, chin high, eyes fixed not on me, but on the crowd. Her voice came out steady, cold, rehearsed. "Enjoy your last dance," she said, every syllable slicing through the room. "You're no longer part of this family. The will has been changed. Everything's mine now." At first, no one moved. It was like time forgot how to tick. Glasses hung midair, mouths half open, and all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I didn't understand. I blinked, thinking I'd misheard. Maybe it was a joke, a terribly bad one. But the way she stared, unblinking, told Me, this was no performance. Someone gasped. Another whispered, "Did she just say?" The music hadn't returned, only the soft hum of confusion and disbelief. I wanted to step forward to say something, but my legs wouldn't move. My body didn't know how to process betrayal in front of an audience. It felt like being stripped bare under a spotlight. I looked around, searching for a familiar face. Someone who might meet my eyes and say, "This isn't real." But they were all frozen, just like me. My fingers curled around the edge of the table, grounding myself in the fabric of the night that had just unraveled. The girl I'd helped raise, the one I comforted through heartbreaks, was standing there as if I were a stranger. And worse, she looked proud, like this was a triumph, like hurting me was part of the inheritance. I felt the first tear break loose, hot and unwelcome, but I quickly brushed it away. I wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Somewhere deep inside, something told me to stay upright, to stay silent, for now, because there are battles that aren't fought in front of crowds. They begin quietly, behind closed doors. I turned away from the stage before she could see the rest of my face. My heels echoed on the marble floor as I made my way toward the hallway. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to move. The past had just been rewritten in public. And yet, a small voice inside me whispered, "There's more to this story than what she thinks she's erased." And that voice was about to lead me exactly where I needed to be. I walked out of that ballroom like a ghost, barely feeling the floor beneath my heels. My breath came shallow, as if the air itself had turned heavy with shame. Her words still echoed inside me. Not just what she said, but how she said it. Cold, final. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. I wasn't just pushed aside. I was erased. And what broke me more than anything was the silence that followed. A room full of people, and not one of them called my name. Not one hand reached for mine. In one sentence, she had turned me into a stranger among my own memories. I found a chair in the hallway and collapsed into it, trying to hold myself together while everything inside me cracked. My palms were clammy, my lips trembled. I stared at the floor, hoping it would open and take me somewhere else. Anywhere but here. I had prepared myself for grief, for loneliness, for birthdays without him, but never for betrayal from the one I had loved like a daughter. I remembered her tears when she failed her first exam, the joy on her face when I taught her to drive, the way she called me Mom when she forgot to be angry. I had poured so much of myself into her, and now she used a microphone to throw it all away. I sat there frozen, while 1,000 versions of the past passed through my mind like old film reels. The moment I married her father, the way he looked at her with pride, how he once whispered to me, "She needs you more than she'll admit." And I believed him. I made space for her. I chose love over resentment, time and time again. And yet, here I was, alone on a birthday he would have made magical, being cut out like I was nothing but an inconvenience to her new world. I wasn't just grieving him now. I was grieving everything he and I had built together, including the illusion that she would one day understand. And still, as I wiped a tear from my cheek with the back of my hand, something stirred inside me. Not anger, not revenge, but a quiet strength, the kind that doesn't need to shout to be heard. I closed my eyes and heard his voice in my head, soft but firm. "If she ever tries, trust the truth." He used to say that justice didn't always need a courtroom. Sometimes it just needed the right moment. I stood up slowly, not knowing what I was looking for, only that I couldn't let this end here. Not like this. Not with her words being the last ones heard. That's when I saw it, the wooden door, tucked behind the staircase, barely touched since the funeral. It led to his old office. The one room I hadn't entered since the day I kissed his photo and told him goodbye. My heart began to pound, not from fear, but from something deeper, like a pulse of fate. Maybe I was losing my mind, or maybe I was about to find it again. Either way, my feet started moving on their own, and in that quiet hallway, I turned the doorknob, not knowing that on the other side, my story was waiting to rise from the ashes. Because what I found in that room wasn't just a document. It was a promise that she couldn't steal. The moment I stepped into his office, the scent hit me like a wave. Cedarwood, dust, and the faint trace of his cologne, still clinging to the air as if waiting for him to return. My knees weakened at the doorway, but I didn't stop. The light was dim, a single lamp casting shadows on the walls, lined with books and old war maps. This room had always felt like his sanctuary, and somehow, even in death, it welcomed me like a long-lost friend. I shut the door gently behind me, sealing myself into a space untouched by betrayal. It was the first time that night I felt safe, and maybe, just maybe, I wasn't alone in there. I ran my fingers along the spines of his favorite novels. Hemingway, Steinbeck, dusty copies he'd reread a dozen times. Every object in that room had a story. A photo of us from our honeymoon, his old military badge, a music box that once played our wedding song. It was like walking through the quietest parts of his soul. And then, I remembered. Years ago, he told me he hid important documents behind the third shelf. He smiled when he said it, half joking, half serious. "Just in case," he whispered. Back then I laughed. Now those words rang in my ears like a prayer. With shaking hands, I moved the books aside, one by one, until I saw it. A slim leather folder, wedged behind the row of war memoirs. My heart slammed against my chest. I pulled it out carefully, dust dancing in the beam of the lamp, as if the room itself exhaled. The leather was worn but intact. I opened the flap and found neatly folded papers inside. My hands trembled as I read the first line. "Last will and testament of Thomas James Whitmore. My husband's real will. Dated, notarized, signed with the pen he always kept in his left desk drawer." But that wasn't all. Tucked beneath the pages was a handwritten note. Just one sentence, written in the slanted, familiar scrawl that once left me love letters on kitchen counters. "If she tries to erase you, trust this paper. What's yours, no one can take." I sat down, clutching the folder to my chest, and let the tears finally fall. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of being seen, of being protected even now. He knew. Somehow he knew what might come. And he left me not just proof, but a message, a reminder that I was never disposable. In that moment, I didn't feel powerless anymore. I felt grounded, like the earth had opened to offer me one final piece of him. She thought she could bury me under shame and ink, but he had built something stronger, something rooted in truth. I looked around the room once more, wiping my face with my sleeve. Then I stood up, folder in hand, my back a little straighter. The ballroom was waiting. She was still up there, basking in a victory that wasn't hers. And I was walking back with something far more powerful than anger, because now I wasn't returning for revenge. I was returning with proof that love leaves a legacy, and hers wasn't strong enough to erase it. Walking back down that hallway, everything felt different. My steps were no longer hesitant. They were deliberate, purposeful. The leather folder was pressed tightly against my chest like a heartbeat, steady and true. I passed the same faces, the same portraits on the walls. But this time they didn't intimidate me. The hurt was still there, yes. But now it was accompanied by something else. Certainty. The kind that only comes when truth is finally on your side. She thought she had the final word. But my husband, he had written his truth quietly, long before her lie ever touched a stage. I paused outside the ballroom doors. I could hear murmurs again, music attempting to resume, awkward and uncertain. People trying to pretend the night hadn't cracked open like a fault line. My fingers tightened around the folder. I remembered the times he talked about legacy. Not money, not property, but intention. A will isn't just about assets, he once told me. It's about clarity. It's about love that doesn't leave confusion behind. And now, his words were the wind at my back. I had the clarity. She had performance. I had the truth. She had spectacle. When I opened the doors, heads turned. Some people whispered. A few looked away. I didn't care. Let them talk. Let them wonder. My heels tapped against the floor with the kind of rhythm only truth can provide. She was still near the stage, laughing now, glass in hand, celebrating a throne she thought she had seized. And then she saw me. Her smile flickered. Just a second. A crack in the mask. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to shake. I just walked, past the tables, past the judgment, past the memory of how small she tried to make me feel. I stepped onto the stage, my heart loud but my voice calm. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised my hand, not angrily, firmly. You tried to erase me with ink and arrogance, I began, my voice echoing through the hall. But this, I held up the folder. This is what he left, not just words, intention, love, justice. I turned to the crowd, to the people who had watched my humiliation, and stayed silent. You heard her version. Now, hear his truth. I opened the will, reading aloud the words he had signed, his voice resurrected in mine. A hush fell over the room that felt deeper than any music. She stood frozen, her face drained of color. The power she thought she had was slipping through her fingers. And I stood tall, speaking the words he wrote for me, to protect me from the storm he must have sensed would come. I wasn't vindictive, I wasn't cruel, but I was no longer afraid, because I had walked through the fire and returned with the proof that love doesn't vanish. It writes itself into paper and legacy and spine. And in that silence, I could feel the tide turning, not just around me, but within me as I stepped. Down from the stage, the silence still hung thick in the air. No one clapped, no one cheered. But that didn't matter. I wasn't there for applause. I was there for truth. My heels met the floor with certainty, and I could feel the weight of his presence beside me. Not as a ghost, but as a promise kept. For the first time that night, I felt grounded. My chest still ached, yes, but not from humiliation, from release. I had carried so much grief in silence, and now justice had spoken through me, not with vengeance, but with clarity. She stood frozen at the edge of the stage, her arms limp at her sides. Whatever performance she had prepared was unraveling before her eyes. Her glass was still in her hand, untouched, the bubbles now flat. She tried to speak once, twice, but no sound came out. People began to murmur again, this time with a different tone. I caught snippets. I didn't know. Can you believe it? And for a moment I wondered if she realized what she had done, not just to me, to herself, because cruelty leaves fingerprints, and tonight she had left hers on every wall. I walked toward the center of the room, where the music had once lifted my heart, where he and I had shared our last dance years ago. The DJ looked unsure, waiting for some kind of cue. I gave him a small nod, and then, softly, as if summoned by memory itself, the first notes of my favorite song filled the room. A melody we used to hum while cooking, a rhythm that had lived in our home long before it ever echoed through a ballroom. It wasn't about celebration anymore. It was about reclaiming the space she tried to steal. I closed my eyes and let the music wrap around me like a shawl. The crowd had faded. The whispers disappeared. All I could feel was the floor beneath my feet, the soft hum of the melody, and the strength in my spine. I began to sway, slowly, then more fully. Alone. Yes, but not empty. I was dancing not for show, but for soul. For the woman who had stayed quiet too long, for the love that refused to be buried, and for the man who had protected me with a pen when his arms could no longer hold me. Somewhere near the edge of the room, someone started to clap. Just once, then again. It wasn't loud or theatrical, just honest. And I didn't need more than that. Because this dance, this moment, wasn't about winning. It was about surviving with grace, about facing betrayal and still choosing to stand tall. I opened my eyes as the song reached its final notes and looked toward the stage once more. She was gone, but I was still there. And I knew then. I hadn't just returned to the ballroom. I had returned to myself. When I turned back to face the room, I wasn't expecting silence anymore. But it remained. A stillness that felt sacred, like the calm after a storm that had revealed what truly mattered. I cleared my throat gently, my fingers brushing the microphone still resting on its stand. I hadn't planned to speak again. But something inside me urged me forward, a voice that had been quiet for far too long. I looked around, not to seek approval, but to hold every gaze that had once looked away. If they had witnessed my collapse, they would also witness my rise. I was never trying to take anything, I began, my voice steady but warm, like a fire held in the palms. Not love, not legacy, not blood. I paused. But when someone tries to erase your place in a story you helped build, you have every right to hold the pen again. The room was utterly still, every eye on me. I saw older women nodding, a man in the back folding his arms with quiet respect. This ballroom was his dream, I continued. But it was our tradition. He built it. I stood beside him. And no paper, no performance, no ego can rewrite that truth. I could feel the shift, not just in the room, but in myself. For years I had loved gently, protected carefully, and endured quietly. I had believed that grace meant staying silent, letting things pass. But tonight, grace looked different. Grace had a spine. Grace wore heels and held old documents in shaking hands. I wasn't here to destroy her. I wasn't here to retaliate. I was here to reclaim what grief had tried to mute. My place, my voice, my part of the legacy. And somehow, I knew he would have been proud of the way I was standing now. Then I looked directly at the seat she had once occupied, now vacant and cold. Family isn't built on signatures, I said softly. It's built on memory, on presence, on sacrifice. My voice faltered just for a moment. Enough to be human, not weak. And when someone throws you out of the house, you helped build. Sometimes the wind will carry you right back in through the front door. A few heads bowed. Someone exhaled, shakily, This wasn't just my story anymore. It was every woman's story who had ever been told to step aside and watch what was hers be handed to someone else. I stepped away from the microphone, leaving only my words behind. I didn't need to defend myself anymore. Truth doesn't need to yell. It just needs space to echo. And that night, it did. Through velvet curtains and chandeliers. Through whispered apologies and widened eyes. Through the silence of the one who had tried to steal my name. And the applause that didn't come in thunder, but in heartbeats. And in that quiet storm of justice, I realized she had taken her exit, but I had made my entrance. The music started again, this time softer. Not festive, but reverent. The kind of melody that wraps itself around your shoulders like a shawl when you didn't know you needed warmth. I stood near the center of the ballroom, hands by my sides, letting the piano speak for me. It wasn't my birthday song. It wasn't even the song he and I had danced to. It was something else. Something gentle, honest, slow. A song for someone who had walked through fire, not to be celebrated, but to remember who she was before the flames. I began to move, not because anyone asked me to, but because my body remembered. It remembered late nights in the kitchen, his hand on my back as we swayed to old records. It remembered our first dance in this very hall, how he whispered in my ear, "You make everything feel like home." I had forgotten how to feel that way, until now. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. It no longer owned me. It sat beside me like an old companion, quieter now, watching as I spun alone under the light he once hung himself. People didn't join in. They didn't need to. This was not their dance. This was mine. A moment not for approval or performance, but for peace. I wasn't proving anything anymore. Not to her, not to them, not even to him. I was simply being, breathing, moving, reclaiming every piece of me she had tried to scatter across the marble floor. And as I danced, I felt lighter. Not like I was escaping gravity, but like I was finally letting go of everything that never truly belonged to me in the first place. When the music faded, I stood still in the middle of the room, heart open, spine straight. There was no applause. Just the sound of chairs shifting, someone wiping away a tear, and one soft voice near the back whispering, "That was beautiful." I turned toward the exit slowly, not in shame, but with dignity. I wasn't walking away from the night. I was walking toward the rest of my life, a life where grief and love would walk side by side, where silence would no longer mean surrender, and where my story would no longer be written by someone else's fear. And as I reached the door, the final note of the piano echoed one last time behind me. It sounded like a promise, not from him, not from me, from something deeper, the music of truth that keeps playing long after the liars leave the room. Because sometimes, the bravest thing a woman can do is dance alone, and still call it joy. As I stepped outside into the night air, a gentle breeze brushed against my skin. Cool, honest, refreshing. The town square was quiet now, the lights from the ballroom glowing behind me like the fading embers of a long burning fire. I looked up at the sky, at the same stars he used to point out during our evening walks. "That one's yours," he used to whisper, tracing a constellation with his finger. I hadn't looked up in a while. Grief does that. It pulls your gaze downward. But that night, I let my head tilt back, and I let the stars remind me. Some love doesn't disappear. It just changes form. I walked slowly toward the bench where we used to sit after dances, my heels echoing softly on the pavement. I sat down and opened the folder one last time. Not to read the will again, I had already memorized the words, but to hold it, to hold him. That folder wasn't just paperwork. It was his final act of care. Proof that he saw me, that he respected me not just as a wife, but as a woman with her own place, her own strength. I wondered how long he had planned it, if he knew her heart would turn, if he sensed that one day I might need protection, not from strangers, but from someone who once called me Mom. The weight of his foresight settled into my bones like warmth. He didn't fight with her while he was alive. He didn't argue or predict storms. He simply prepared the ground for truth to bloom after the rain. And that, I realized, was real love. Not the flowers, not the dances, but the quiet shelter built for you when the sky is still clear. He knew me well enough to know I wouldn't fight dirty. He trusted I would find my way to the truth without claws. That belief, that faith in who I am. That's what broke me open again. Not from pain, but from a love that reached past death. I closed the folder gently and held it to my heart. Not to keep it hidden, but to say goodbye. He had done his part. He had made sure I would stand, not just survive. And now, it was my turn to keep walking. Not toward another battle, but toward peace. I could still hear her voice in my memory, cold and rehearsed. But louder than that now was his, whispering, always whispering. You are more than what they try to take from you. And for the first time in a long while, I believed it. I rose from the bench slowly, watching as a few ballroom guests trickled out into the night. Their chatter, softer, gentler now. No one looked at me with pity. No one avoided my eyes. Maybe they finally saw what I had known all along. That strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it stands in silence, holding a folder, and walking away with grace. And as I turned to leave, I realized he had left me more than a legacy. He had left me myself. I returned home just as the moon reached its highest point, casting a soft silver light over the porch where he once waited with 2 glasses of wine and that knowing smile. I unlocked the door slowly, half expecting the air inside to feel different. But it didn't. It felt like him, like us, like everything that had once made this house a home. I kicked off my heels, walked barefoot across the wooden floor, and let the silence settle around me. Not the kind of silence that isolates, the kind that protects, the kind that listens, the kind that finally feels earned. I placed the folder on the kitchen table beside an old photograph of us from the first city ball. He was wearing that ridiculous tie with the stars on it. I was laughing mid-blink. We looked so young, so fearless. I traced my finger along the edge of the photo, then whispered, "We did it, love." Not to claim victory, but to acknowledge survival, to honor the love that outlasted grief, betrayal, and even death. There was power in that, in enduring, in holding your ground when everything around you tells you to shrink. Later that night, I lit a single candle and stood in the middle of my living room, the same way I had stood in that ballroom. I turned on the music, our music, and let it play as I moved slowly, arms out, heart open. No crowd, no performance, just the echo of heels against marble floors and the quiet fire that had reignited in my chest. This wasn't a celebration. It was a declaration, a promise to myself. They can try to silence you, but your rhythm is yours. Your story is yours. Outside, the wind rustled the trees. A few autumn leaves danced across the porch, like little messengers of freedom. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed, fully, deeply, without apology. I was no longer the woman searching for her place in someone else's story. I was the author now, of my days, of my voice, of my dance. And even if I never stepped into that ballroom again, it didn't matter, because I had brought the truth home with me. And the truth was, I had never been erased. I had only been waiting for the right moment to rise. And as the final notes of the song faded into the quiet, I stood still one last time, my hands at my sides, my feet planted, my heart steady. Because justice doesn't always wear a robe. Sometimes it wears heels and walks away on marble with her head held high. Where are you watching from? Drop your city and age in the comments. And if this story moved you, share it with someone who still believes in quiet justice and unforgettable love. Don't forget to subscribe. More stories are waiting to find you.